Danielle Binks is a Melbourne-based literary agent with the Jacinta de Marza Management Agency and an author of the best-selling middle grade book, The Year the Map Changed, and the award-winning YA novel, The Monster of Her Age, which I notice we have on our viewing table over there. And Danielle also teaches creative writing at RMIT. I'm first going to hand over to Bronwyn, who's going to introduce you to our project and some interim findings from what we've done so far.
So the title of our presentation that Leonie and I are going to talk about is How to Get Teenagers Reading More Books, in particular, what works and what doesn't work. I'm going to start with just a really brief overview of the research project from which our data comes from. As Lucinda mentioned, we're part of an Australian Research Council funded linkage project. It's really doing a whole of ecosystem mapping of the world of books, teenagers and reading in Australia. And I've got our research team up here, and then down the bottom we've also got our research partners. So we've got academics working from Deakin University, QUT, and we've got partners with the Copyright Agency, Book People, SLAV in Victoria, and other universities and the publishers as well. And what we're really trying to understand is how do teenagers find their way to books, and what is the role of the cultural intermediaries, such as all the people in the room, in helping them to get there. What we're going to talk about today is what we've found out about teenage readers in this process. And the data that we're drawing on comes primarily from a national survey that we're running. So far we've we've got responses from 12,000 secondary school students across all the sectors, so Catholic, government and independent schools in Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland and Western Australia. Started the survey last year. We're still going, so what I am saying is preliminary in nature, but we do have enough results that we're reasonably confident in the sort of highline findings that we're talking about now. I've also been doing interviews with industry representatives in the book and publishing industries, authors including Danielle herself, and running some focus groups with teenage readers. And these focus groups are both with the avid readers that I'm going to get to in a minute, and your more mixed groups of readers as well. So the biggest takeaway, I'd say, is really, like adults, teenagers read for a range of different reasons, and they look for different things from books. There are, of course, reading preferences that correlates with things like age and gender, but they don't apply to every individual reader. In terms of how much teenagers read, we're seeing three distinct types of readers in our research. Avid readers, those teenagers who'll find their way to a book no matter really what is going on in their lives. The occasional light readers, and these are teens who will pick up a book if it interests them or it happens to appear in their life, but they won't necessarily seek out a book or make time for reading. Then we have reluctant or non-readers, and these are teenagers who either really don't like or who aren't interested in reading unless they really have to. To put some numbers around these categories, our survey data is indicating that most teenagers fall into that second group, so the occasional or light reading category. When we ask teenagers the extent to which they read in their free time, about 2/3 of them say that they spend some or a small amount of time reading. A quarter say that they don't spend any time reading at all, and about a fifth spend a lot or as much time as they can reading. The other general trends I want to talk about are we're seeing a preference for reading printed books rather than e-books or audiobooks. And this is a fairly strong preference. About 74%, 3/4 say they prefer printed book. Somewhat surprising given we think teenagers digital natives, but there is a preference for printed books. Fiction is generally more popular than non-fiction, but there is about a third of teenage readers who read both a mix of fiction and non-fiction. We're talking about fiction as a genre. Fantasy, mystery and crime, and dystopian are the most popular fiction genres amongst teenagers. But I would also want to note that humour and graphic novels are particularly popular amongst younger teenagers, aged about 12 to 13 years old. But when we get to that sort of older age group, about 14, 15 plus, romance and dystopian fiction start to become a lot more popular. In terms of non-fiction, we're seeing history, biographies, autobiographies, and memoir, and technology and science has been the top choices for teenagers who read non-fiction for pleasure. And as you're going to hear a bit more from Danielle when we talk, Book Talk is having a big impact on what certain groups of teens choose to read. And I'd say this is more the category of teenagers who are 14 years or older, particularly those who identify as female or with a non-binary gender identity. We see this not only in what teenagers say about where they get book recommendations, but also in what they say about what books they tell us they enjoyed reading. One of the questions in our survey is, what book did you enjoy reading most in the past year? And in the top 3, we have 2 Book Talk popular titles, Karen McManus's One of Us is Lying and Colleen Hoover's It Ends With Us. The third book to round out is the Harry Potter series in various different forms. I'm now going to turn to what teenagers themselves say about their reading tastes and preferences. And I've got quotes in my following slides that have come from our focus group with teenagers. And they're arranged into 4 categories. So the first one is, why do teenagers read? Second is, how do teenagers choose books? Third is, what keeps a teenager reading a book? And lastly, what stops teens reading? Firstly, why do teenagers read? Escape, rest and relaxation are key reasons why our teenagers choose to read in their free time. Many of the teenagers we speak to talk about reading being a break from the pressures of schoolwork and everyday life and a source of entertainment. I'll just draw your attention to the yellow quote here, which I think is a really interesting example about how the same teenager will read for different reasons at different times. And this teenager talks about reading to learn, reading to understand, and reading to have fun. How do teenagers choose books? First and foremost, teenagers look for what they're interested in. Now, this will differ by reader, and it could be a particular genre, a particular type of content, for example, car books or sports biographies, or a book by an author they already like. When a teenager is evaluating whether they are interested in a book, they look first at the title, then the cover, and then the blurb. Teenagers report using this search strategy both in their school libraries and libraries more general, and also in bookshops. Some teenagers do look at reviews online, such as Goodreads, but this seems to be a relatively small proportion of teenage audiences. One of the most striking things we're seeing is that many teenagers prefer to trust their own judgment rather than relying on recommendations from other people, especially if those recommendations come from their parents. Avid readers tend to be in this category as they have a good understanding of their reading taste and they're the most discerning about what types of books they'd like to read. But on the other hand, you also have avid readers who seek recommendations from friends and family and participate in discussions such as book clubs to find recommendations. So this is where you really do see a wide range of variation in how teenagers source books. The other thing I would note is that it's not just parents whose recommendations are rejected. We had one focus group member who was completely outraged that their sister, who's a reader and has similar taste in books to them, would not ever read any of their book recommendations. So there does seem to be a certain category of teenager it's their own opinion that is most important. What keeps teenagers reading a book? In other words, what's going to hold their attention? For fiction, plot and characters are key. And I really want to emphasise here pace. Books that are not fast-paced and grabbing the attention of teenagers will not be finished. And the characters need to be somebody that the teenagers connect with or care about in some way. For non-fiction, it's books that are related to an existing interest or books that help a teen learn about something that they're interested in. In this context, and I imagine Christine will talk about this in a little bit, worthy doesn't always cut it. So the books that are assigned by school or recommended as being age-appropriate or serious are not always very popular amongst teenage readers. And finally, what stops teenagers reading? The top reason we're hearing is time pressure. So in particular, the increase in busyness with homework and other activities from the beginning of secondary school. Teenagers will also stop reading a book if they're not enjoying it. And again, it's that sort of pace issue that's a key issue.